My name is Melissa Mercer. I'm 36, and the day I picked up the keys to my first home, my mother spoke to me with such controlled anger that you would have thought I had betrayed her. I was standing in the empty kitchen of my new place on Bellwood Avenue when my phone showed 9 missed calls from my parents. I assumed they were upset because I hadn't told them earlier. I thought my mother was overwhelmed with happy tears, and my father wanted to inspect the water heater. I was wrong on both counts. About a month later, my 9-year-old niece accidentally told me the truth while sitting at a kitchen counter. What my family did after that made the missing spare key seem like only the beginning. My parents weren't furious about the house I bought. They were furious because my sister was supposed to move into it. If you've ever been the person everyone depends on, you may recognize parts of this. Tell me where you're listening from and stay until the end, because the way this was finally resolved surprised even me. I need to explain what my role had always been in my family before I tell you what happened. I'm a senior accountant at a firm in Brookfield, Indiana. I've been at the same office for 11 years. For 8 of those years, I lived alone in a small apartment above a laundromat. Every Tuesday, the entire place smelled like someone else's laundry soap. I made coffee at home, drove an old compact car with manual locks, and transferred money into savings every month without telling anyone. I saved that way for 13 years. In my family, I was the person who took care of paperwork. I prepared my parents' taxes every winter. I handled Aunt Denise's returns too. When my grandmother needed help with an insurance form, I was the one they called. Any envelope with an official seal usually found its way onto my kitchen table. My sister Megan once joked that I was the family's unpaid accountant, notary, and therapist. Everyone laughed, including me. That was how I responded to things. I laughed, then I dealt with the problem. But being dependable was never really praise in my family. It was an assignment. There was no salary, no time off, and no way to resign. You were given the position as a child and only learned the terms by being expected to meet them. For years, I confused being useful with being loved. I kept everyone's finances in order and convinced myself that was proof I mattered. So when I stood in my empty kitchen with 9 missed calls, I had no idea another responsibility was about to be placed on me. Apparently, being reliable also meant providing housing. I just hadn't been told that part yet. My parents, Elaine and Harold Mercer, owned a 3-bedroom home on Cedar Avenue, about 12 minutes from my new house. My father was 68, retired from a factory maintenance job, and mostly spoke when something needed repairing. My mother was 65 and worked part-time in the office of St. Andrew's Church. In our town, that job gave her more influence than most elected positions. A little less than 2 years earlier, my sister Megan's husband, Daniel Doyle, lost the plumbing business he had operated for 7 years. Suppliers raised their prices, 2 major customers never paid him, and the company slowly weakened before collapsing all at once. Around 20 months before I bought my house, Megan, Daniel, and their 3 children moved into my parents' home. Megan was 32. Their children were Lily, who was 9, Owen, who was 7, and Sophie, who was 4. 7 people were living in a house designed for 4, and I watched the arrangement wear down every person inside it. I never criticized anyone. In August, I bought the children's school supplies. I paid for Lily's summer program and told Megan I had gotten the money through a special promotion, which was completely made up. I brought groceries and pretended I had simply been passing through. I helped in the quiet ways I always had, so no one had to ask. Then my mother began bringing up the same strange subject. She would wait until we were alone drying dishes and ask, almost casually, "Have you found anything with more room yet?" More room? I lived alone above a laundromat. At first, I thought it was just an odd question she kept repeating. It wasn't. It was a measurement. I want to tell you about a shoebox because the story really began there 23 years earlier. When I was 13, I babysat for 2 families nearby. They paid me $6 an hour, which seemed like a fortune at the time. I kept the money in a shoebox under a sweater in my closet. I was saving for a red 12-speed bike I had seen in the window of the local hardware store. I counted that money constantly. One winter, our water heater stopped working during the same week my father's hours were reduced. When I came home from school the following Monday, the shoebox felt noticeably lighter. No one had asked me. My mother sat me at the kitchen table, placed her hand over mine, and explained that families had to support one another. She said she knew I would understand. Then she looked toward my father and Aunt Denise and said, "Melissa understands these things. She always has." Everyone smiled at me. I remember how that smile felt. It seemed like recognition, like I had been awarded something. So I smiled back and said, "The water heater matters more." I never got the bike. That was when I learned the arrangement my family was offering me. Understanding was the admission fee. Taking care of things was how I earned my place. For the next 23 years, I was the girl who understood. I understood at 16, at 25, at 30. Eventually, understanding became the only quality anyone expected from me. The house on Bellwood Avenue was the first important thing I had ever kept for myself. My family treated that decision as if I had committed an offense. I bought it in secret, and there was a reason for that. A few years earlier, I had been considering a used car. It was an ordinary, practical purchase, but I mentioned it during Sunday dinner before signing anything. My family immediately turned it into a committee meeting. My father criticized the transmission. Aunt Denise said she knew a mechanic. My mother insisted I should wait until summer, though she never explained why. By the end of the discussion, I was nearly ready to buy the vehicle my mother preferred, even though I hated the color. So when I began searching for a house last winter, I told no one. The longer I looked, the more pointed my mother's comments became. She repeatedly mentioned a 4-bedroom property on Parkview Lane. "That neighborhood has excellent schools," she would say. "A place like that is a smart investment. You should think ahead." I had never told her I was house hunting. Still, every time Parkview Lane came up, I felt as if I were overhearing a conversation about myself. All I wanted was a door I controlled and a deed with only my name on it. In early spring, I found a 2-bedroom cottage on Bellwood Avenue. It had a small porch with one uneven step, and the previous owners had left a green ceramic bowl beside the toaster. The price was $312,000. I put down $62,400, exactly 1/5 of the cost. It represented 13 years of saving in a single transfer. Before closing, my realtor asked whether I wanted my family to tour the house. I told her, "My family doesn't tour anything without turning it into a vote. The paperwork took 40 minutes. They would need months to make me regret signing." Closing took place on a Friday morning. I signed the documents, shook hands, and drove straight to Bellwood Avenue. For the first time, I stood in a kitchen that belonged to me. I sent a picture of the keys to the family group chat and wrote, "I bought a house. Surprise!" Then I placed my phone on the counter. When I checked it again, there were 9 missed calls from my parents. Their home number, my mother's cell, and several more from her personal phone. There wasn't a single message congratulating me. Megan hadn't written anything at all. I called my mother back from the empty kitchen. She answered immediately. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "You made this decision without consulting us. Not, where is it? Not, are you happy? Not even, how much did it cost? Consulting them?" I was 36 years old and had bought a small cottage, not a corporation. I laughed because I honestly believed she was joking. "Mom, this is a 2-bedroom house. It isn't a business merger." My father was on speakerphone. I could hear him in the background, but he said nothing. My mother's voice became quieter instead of louder. In my family, that was the real warning. "You don't understand what you've done," she said. Then she ended the call. I stood there holding my phone in a kitchen that still smelled faintly of fresh paint. After decades of studying my mother's moods, I knew this wasn't ordinary hurt or worry. Her anger had the shape of something collapsing. I just didn't know what it was yet. By Sunday, the calls had spread through the family and the church. Aunt Denise texted first. "Call your mother. She's heartbroken." heartbroken over a house. Then one of my mother's cousins called to tell me that family was the only thing that truly mattered. That advice came from someone who had once taken her own brother to court over a lawnmower. Two women from St. Andrews sent nearly identical messages about how fortunate I was and how good fortune was meant to be shared. Later, I noticed the wording. The same phrases kept appearing in the same order. Family stands together. Blessings should be shared. Your poor mother. When several people accuse you with nearly identical language, someone has usually supplied the language. At the time, though, I only felt confused. I had bought a house in my own town with my own savings, less than 15 minutes from my parents. They were acting as if I had disappeared overseas. The message that bothered me most came from Megan. She had been silent for 3 days. No congratulations, no excited punctuation, not even one of her usual string of emojis. Then, late Sunday night, she sent one sentence. "So this is really what you've decided?" I read it over and over. It sounded like someone watching a door close, but I hadn't closed a door. I had finally opened one. I typed, "What are you talking about?" The typing indicator appeared, vanished, and appeared again. Then nothing came. Everyone seemed to be mourning the same loss, while I was the only person who didn't know what had died. Nearly 4 weeks after closing, my mother ordered me to come to Sunday dinner at Cedar Avenue. That is the only way to describe the message. It didn't sound like an invitation. It sounded like a scheduled appearance. I went because 23 years of training do not disappear in a month. Dinner was baked chicken and forced politeness. My father mentioned the weather twice. Megan avoided looking at me. She kept cutting Sophie's food into smaller pieces even after Sophie had stopped eating. Daniel repeatedly said the meal was good, which was unusually talkative for him around my parents. Every conversation stopped halfway through, as if the entire table was waiting for someone to begin. During dessert, my mother put down her fork. "The house on Parkview Lane is still available," she said. "You know, if you're interested." The room became quiet in a very particular way. Not surprised. Caught. I looked at her. "How do you know it's still available?" She ran her fingers over the tablecloth. "People talk." But I had never told her I was searching for a house. She shouldn't have known about Parkview Lane, much less been monitoring its status. Megan stared down at her coffee. My father suddenly became interested in folding his napkin. Then Lily looked up from her dessert and asked, "Aunt Mel, is your new house the one where—" "Megan," my sister said sharply. Lily stopped. Everyone at the table immediately started talking about something meaningless. The sound came back too quickly. I sat there with my spoon still raised and understood one thing clearly. Everyone else knew the plan. I learned the rest from the only person in my family who didn't know she was supposed to keep quiet. After dinner, I was rinsing plates when Lily climbed onto a stool beside the counter with her bowl of melting ice cream. She liked making lists and planning things. She spoke as if she were explaining a school outing. "Mom said when you got the bigger place, Owen and I would share the large bedroom," she said. "Sophie would sleep with Grandma and Grandpa until she turned 6. My hands stopped in the water. I kept my voice even. "The bigger place?" Lily looked at me with the patience children reserve for adults who are slow to understand. "Your new house. Mom and Grandma have talked about it forever, since before Christmas." "Since before Christmas?" It was already spring. I dried my hands, walked into the living room, and asked the question directly, because I had learned that my family used private conversations to make decisions without me. Were Megan and Daniel planning to move into my house? No one asked what I meant. No one looked confused. Megan shut her eyes. Daniel stared at the carpet. My father looked at my mother. My mother looked relieved. It was as if she had finally been allowed to put down something heavy. "You were never meant to hear it from Lily," she said. Then she explained the arrangement in a speech so smooth it clearly wasn't new. I was supposed to buy the 4-bedroom house on Parkview Lane, the one she had been steering me toward for months. Megan, Daniel, and the children would move in with me. It would only be for a few years. Everyone would be helping everyone. Everyone had agreed. Everyone except me. I stood in my parents' living room while they described my future as if it had already happened. "Why would you make plans for my life without asking me?" I said. My mother looked honestly confused. "What belongs to you belongs to the family, Melissa. That's how families work." I said no. I want to be clear about how unusual that was. I had practiced saying no in my head for years, but I had never actually used it without softening the word. I didn't yell. I didn't unload every grievance I had been carrying since childhood. I simply said, "I'm sorry you made this arrangement without me, but I am not agreeing to it." For a moment, nobody moved. They had never heard me refuse without immediately offering a compromise. My mother recovered quickly. "Then sell your cottage," she said. "Parkview is still available. We'll help you choose the right place this time." That sentence told me exactly how she viewed my purchase. My home was not a home. It was a mistake they could help me correct. I said, "Bellwood isn't for sale, and it isn't available to anyone." Megan finally spoke from the couch. "You only have 2 bedrooms. We have 3 children." She said it as though the number of bedrooms settled the matter. No one asked whether I wanted to live with 5 other people. No one asked what I had planned for my own life. My preferences had never been included in the family's calculations. I put on my coat, picked up my keys, and left. On the drive home, I felt lighter. I thought I had ended the discussion. In my family, saying no did not end anything. It started a campaign. At first, the pressure was polite. The following week, Aunt Denise arrived at my door carrying a chicken casserole and an explanation. She walked through the cottage, calling it cozy in the same tone people use when they mean barely suitable. Then she sat at my table and told me that relatives were supposed to look after one another. She talked about how her parents' generation had shared everything. She said that once my initial shock passed, I would make the honorable choice. Apparently, the shock was mine, the shock of refusing to be selfish. Over the next month, I received 3 more casseroles, a lasagna, and a pound cake. Visitors came through in shifts, each one repeating nearly the same argument. A church friend of my mother's said she was praying that I would become more open-hearted. My mother's cousin left a message saying houses didn't last forever, but family did. As an accountant, I found the claim questionable. The house had a 28-year mortgage. My family was treating me as if I were the asset about to be repossessed. The part that bothered me most was that none of them asked me anything about my life. They didn't ask whether I liked the cottage, why I wanted a private home, or what it meant to spend 13 years saving for one. Every conversation began with what I owed and finished by calling me selfish. I remained polite. I froze the food. I told one visitor, "I've heard that so often it no longer sounds like a sentence." But I kept noticing the script. The aunts, cousins, and churchwomen all used the same expressions and followed the same sequence. I knew who had written it. In the middle of that pressure, I almost gave in. One afternoon, I drove to Cedar Avenue to return a raincoat Sophie had left in my car. I entered through the kitchen, as I always had, and paused there without anyone noticing. An air mattress was folded against the living room wall. Owen's shoes had been lined up on the stairs because there was no open space left in his room. Through the bedroom doorway, I could see Sophie's crib mattress pushed beside my parents' bed. Megan stood at the stove stirring dinner. She was only 32, but from the side she looked much older. My mother was at the sink, and I realized how curved her back had become. No one knew I was there. No one was trying to persuade me. This was simply what their life looked like now. 7 people sharing a house built for 4 was difficult. I couldn't pretend otherwise. The old instinct rose in me, the part that had always understood and stepped in. I took out my phone and opened my realtor's number. I was ready to ask whether Parkview was still available and how quickly I could sell Bellwood. Then another part of me interrupted. Why was my house the only solution anyone had considered? There were rentals. There were relatives. There were assistance programs. Daniel had a brother in another city. There were options everywhere, but every path had been directed toward me. I put my phone away. Then I did what I had always done when faced with a problem. I made a plan. If housing was truly the issue, there were ways to solve a housing problem. I spent the weekend researching. I found 5 rentals within Lily's school district, including 2 with 3 bedrooms. I prepared a budget showing what Megan and Daniel could afford each month and where the shortfall would be. I located a nonprofit that helped families recover after a failed small business. I offered specific assistance. I would cover the application fees for every apartment they applied to and help with the security deposit. I printed everything and placed it in a folder. On Tuesday evening, I took it to Megan at my parents' house, believing I was bringing practical help. She opened the folder and turned through the pages. Her expression changed, but it wasn't relief. "A spreadsheet?" she said. "It's a plan. There are 5 real apartments here." "We don't need a spreadsheet, Mel." Her voice broke. "We need family." That was the entire conflict in one sentence, although I didn't understand it fully until much later. I thought I was offering to solve the problem, but the problem was not the request. The problem was that I was the request. They wanted my house, my roof, and my return to the household arrangement where my needs disappeared into everyone else's. My folder was proof that I was refusing the role while pretending to be helpful. Daniel came in while we were still talking. He looked at the folder, then at me, and left without saying anything. I assumed he was disgusted with me. I was wrong, and that remains one of the few things I'm grateful I misunderstood. The next Saturday, my father came to Bellwood Avenue alone. He didn't call first. I saw his faded navy pickup at the curb and found him standing on the porch with his toolbox. He examined the uneven step. "That board is going to give way under somebody," he said. That was his greeting. He didn't mention Parkview, Megan, Daniel, or the argument. He simply removed the damaged board, cut a replacement, and secured it with a few precise hammer strikes. I sat nearby with coffee and handed him tools before he asked. That was how my father and I communicated. When he finished, he put away the toolbox and stood looking at the yard. Then he said, "Your mother isn't wrong about everything. She's just carrying more than she lets people see." "Carrying what?" he almost answered. I've replayed that moment many times. His mouth opened, then closed. Whatever he wanted to say reached the edge of being spoken and stopped there. He tapped the repaired step with his boot and said, "Keep that board sealed." Then he drove away. I stood on the solid step he had fixed and realized there was a financial fact in my parents' lives that I had never been allowed to see. My mother had been doing all this planning around a number. I would find it later in a cardboard box. If you've ever watched a father try to apologize for a mother with a toolbox instead of an explanation, tell me about it. And if you're still wondering what my parents were hiding, stay with me, because I didn't expect the answer either. A few weeks later, I held a housewarming party. It was my attempt to lower the temperature. I cleaned for 2 days, baked orange squares from my grandmother's handwritten recipe, and invited the entire family. They all came. My parents, Megan, Daniel, the children, Aunt Denise, and 2 women from St. Andrews who stayed for nearly 3 hours. For a while, it almost felt normal. Lily sat in the window seat of my office and read aloud to Sophie. My father inspected the basement with a flashlight and said the furnace was in good shape, which was practically a love letter from him. My mother remained formal. She complimented my curtains the way someone might compliment the haircut of a person they considered a competitor. There was a green ceramic bowl beside my toaster. The previous owners had left it, and I liked it enough to keep it. My spare key was inside. The bowl was visible all afternoon. People came into the kitchen for drinks, food, and conversation. Everyone had access to the counter. The guests left around 6. I cleaned up, dried the dishes, and began making tea. Then I noticed the bowl was empty. I told myself the key had been moved. A child might have picked it up. Maybe I had put it somewhere else. I searched the counters, drawers, floor, trash, and the pockets of coats I hadn't worn in months. By 10 o'clock, I accepted the obvious conclusion. No one had broken into my house. Someone had taken the key while visiting. I never learned whose pocket it went into, and I've decided not to find out. Instead, I called a locksmith the next morning. Within 2 days, both doors had new locks, and the back door received an extra deadbolt. I didn't announce it. I didn't send a pointed message to the family chat. I simply changed the locks and made the house mine again. The locksmith was cheerful and spent most of the appointment talking about his fantasy sports league. Before leaving, he said, "You'd be amazed how many people have keys to other people's homes." I told him I had stopped being amazed. That night was the hardest point of the spring, not because I thought someone would break in. I sat on the kitchen floor with the new keys in my hand and cried for the first time since closing day. The pain came from what the locks represented. I was 36 years old and installing new hardware because I no longer trusted my own relatives. Every key seemed to confirm that I had been right to keep my family out. Being right felt terrible. I hid the spare somewhere I won't disclose. I left the green bowl on the counter empty. I could have put it away, but I didn't. Some part of me knew that the missing key would return to the story. I just didn't know it would come back with a moving truck. This is where the story stopped being only about my house. Since earning my accounting license, I had prepared my parents' taxes every year. Each winter, my mother handed me a shoebox full of receipts, as if she were granting me an official assignment. That year, though, she told my father to tell me they would handle their own taxes. Spring passed. They filed for an extension. I knew because my father mentioned it quietly during the housewarming, as if reporting a failed harvest. Then, in the middle of summer, his Navy pickup appeared at Bellwood Avenue again. He carried a cardboard box up the repaired step and placed it on my kitchen table. "Your mother can't deal with this box," he said. "Don't tell her I brought it." He left before I could ask anything else. I made tea and began sorting the papers. It was strangely calming. Receipts, pension statements, and the familiar records of my parents' modest life spread across the table. Then I picked up a lender's mortgage interest statement. My parents had paid off Cedar Avenue years earlier. I remembered the celebration. There had even been a cake shaped like a house. But this document showed that they had opened a home equity line secured against Cedar Avenue a little more than 2 years before. The balance was $92,000. I sat with the statement in my hand and did the calculation I had never thought to perform. The home my parents owned outright was no longer free and clear. The date matched the period when Daniel's business began failing. I called my father the next morning and asked him to meet me at 7 on the porch. Just him. He came and sat on the step he had repaired, resting his arms on his knees. I placed the statement beside him. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he told me everything in the measured voice he used when explaining how machinery worked. 2 years earlier, Daniel's business had been failing but wasn't completely gone. It was in that painful stage where one more loan might still save it. Megan had come to Cedar Avenue crying because she was afraid they would lose their house. My mother had watched her own family lose a home when she was young, and she refused to let that happen to her daughter. So my parents borrowed $92,000 against their paid-off house and put the money into Daniel's company. The company failed anyway. Their house was saved, but the debt remained. Now the payments came out of my father's pension and Social Security every month, and the amount was becoming impossible to manage. My father explained the plan. I would buy a larger house. Megan, Daniel, and the children would move in with me. My parents would sell Cedar Avenue, use the money to clear the loan, and move into a smaller condo near the church. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the step. "On paper, it worked," he said. "Every part of it fit together. Every route led through me." I asked the question that had been waiting for him. Why didn't anyone simply ask me? My father stayed quiet for a while. Then he said, "Your mother gave up nursing school to raise her younger brothers. Nobody asked her either. She doesn't know how to imagine another way." He stood, tapped the step with his boot, and returned to the house where they still owed money. My mother learned that I knew within a week. Cedar Avenue had thin walls, and my parents had been married for more than 4 decades. She didn't call me. Instead, she appeared at my office on a weekday afternoon and asked the receptionist to send me out, as though she were collecting a prescription. We sat in a small conference room with terrible coffee. My mother had spent weeks fighting me through casseroles, relatives, and church friends. Now she tried a different approach. She gave me the truth carefully, using it like a weapon. "So you know now," she said. "I know." Her chin lifted. "Then you know you can solve this." She described the entire arrangement again. I would sell Bellwood, purchase Parkview, move the Doyles into it, and let my parents sell Cedar Avenue to pay off the debt. Everyone would have somewhere to go. "One decision from you," she said. Her voice shook slightly. "One yes, and this ends for all of us." For the first time in the entire conflict, my mother looked old to me. She had spent her whole adult life holding other people up, and now she was exhausted from it. The ugly truth about being the reliable person is that part of you wants to be indispensable. The wound keeps reaching for the job that created it. I wanted to pick up a pen. Instead, I said, "Mom, I can't become the solution. I can help, but I can't be the plan." She gathered her purse and left. That night, a screenshot appeared in the family group chat. Megan had apparently reserved a moving truck for the following Saturday. I still don't know whether the screenshot was sent by accident or as a warning. Megan says it was an accident. Lily later told me her mother had been crying while typing it. Either way, Saturday arrived. I went to work. It was a busy period at the accounting firm, and I spent the morning handling other people's numbers. Some stubborn part of me refused to believe my family would actually try to move into my house without permission. At 11:40, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Patel, my 73-year-old neighbor, a retired schoolteacher with an extraordinary ability to notice everything on Bellwood Avenue. "Melissa," she said, using the voice people reserve for emergencies, "there's a moving truck in your driveway." I asked her what she could see. She gave me a full report. A rental truck backed up to the house, a man carrying boxes toward the porch, Daniel and the children outside, and a woman at my front door trying a key. She tried it once more. Then she stepped back and stared at the lock. Megan was standing on my welcome mat with the key that had disappeared from the green bowl. The key no longer matched the locks. "Should I call someone?" Mrs. Patel asked. "You already did," I said. "I'm coming home." The drive from my office took about 18 minutes. I expected panic. I expected to be shaking or furious. Instead, I drove steadily the entire way. Somewhere on State Road 19, the last hopeful part of me finally gave up. What remained was calm. When I arrived, half the neighborhood was watching through its windows. A rental truck occupied my driveway with the ramp lowered. 10 boxes were stacked on my porch. Sophie was asleep in her car seat near the lawn. Owen was pushing a toy tractor through my flower bed. Lily sat on the steps with her backpack in her lap. My mother's sedan was parked across the street. Megan must have called her when the key failed. I got out of the car, and Megan began talking before I closed the door. "It was only supposed to be temporary. We were going to call you. The truck was cheaper on Saturdays. We thought—" Daniel had stopped carrying boxes. He stood beside the truck with empty hands, looking as though he wished he could disappear. My mother crossed the street and started toward my porch. "We can discuss this inside," she said. I stepped onto the path. "Load everything back onto the truck." My mother kept walking as if she hadn't heard me. Then I said, "You need to leave my property." The sentence came out before I could soften it. My mother stopped. Even the children became quiet. She looked pale, then straightened and repeated the belief she had used against me all year. "What belongs to you belongs to the family, Melissa. That is what family means." I stood on the step my father had repaired. "Then I guess I'm not part of the family today." It took about half an hour to put the boxes back on the truck. I watched the entire process with my arms folded, trying not to show how badly it hurt. The truck left before 4. By that evening, I had apparently become the villain in several group chats I wasn't included in. Someone had removed me from the family thread. For weeks, there were no invitations and no pictures of the children. Owen's birthday came and went later that summer. I learned about the party from a bakery employee who assumed I had been invited. That hurt more than I expected. I carried it around for days. My mother told everyone that I had chosen a house instead of her grandchildren. The wording traveled through town exactly as she intended. Then, one Tuesday night, my phone showed a name I never expected to see. Grandma Evelyn was 85 and almost never called anyone directly. She usually sent messages through other relatives, like a queen using messengers. I answered, expecting another attempt to make me feel guilty. Instead, she said, "I heard you refused Elaine." I waited for the criticism. She responded with a long, thoughtful, Then she told me something I had never heard before. When my mother was 19, she had been accepted into nursing school. The letter had sat on the kitchen table at my grandmother's farm for 2 days. That same week, my great-grandfather lost his job at the factory. There were 2 younger boys at home who needed food, and my mother was the oldest. The acceptance letter disappeared. No one ever discussed it again. "Your mother cried in my kitchen once," Grandma Evelyn told me. "Then she never brought it up. I let her keep it buried. That was my mistake, not hers." I sat quietly for a while. Then I asked what I should do. My grandmother refused to answer. "Come to my birthday dinner," she said. "Whatever you decide, make the decisions standing up." The most difficult part of this entire story didn't involve yelling. It was just me, my kitchen table, and a laptop at 2 in the morning, 13 days before my grandmother's birthday. Of course, I opened a spreadsheet. Across the top, I wrote a question I had never allowed myself to consider. What would it cost to buy my family back? In the first column, I listed the money. Paying off my parents' loan would require $92,000. I had some savings left after the down payment, but nowhere near enough. To reach that amount, I would have to borrow against my retirement account. I would lose my safety net at 36 and spend years repaying the withdrawal while carrying my new mortgage. I entered every number anyway. Then I created a second column titled, "What does it purchase?" That was when I stopped pretending. I had been keeping the family ledger since I was 13. I knew exactly how this worked. I had emptied the shoebox, received one warm smile, and watched that smile disappear when the next emergency arrived. If I paid off the loan, I wouldn't be buying my family's love. I would be renewing my position. The terms would stay the same, but the payment would be larger. At 2:40 in the morning, I entered one word in the final cell: rent. I stared at it until my eyes hurt, then closed the laptop without saving. For me, that was practically an act of rebellion. Have you ever sat alone at night trying to calculate the cost of being accepted by your own family? If you have, leave a comment for the next person who is awake wondering whether she is selfish. She may need to hear that she isn't. And stay with me, because what I brought to my grandmother's birthday instead of a check was the decision I'm most proud of. The answer didn't come from the spreadsheet. It came from a door frame. That weekend, I was cleaning out the hall closet. When I lifted the old shelf lining, I saw pencil marks along the frame. The previous owners had painted around them instead of covering them. There were small horizontal lines climbing upward, each dated and labeled in a parent's handwriting. Nora, age 5. Nora, age 7. Lower down was another column. Caleb, age 4. Years of a different family's children being measured against that doorway had remained there. I sat on the closet floor and looked at those marks. That was what a house was. Not merely bedrooms and square footage for relatives to assign before the owner was consulted. It was where someone recorded the passing years. No one in my family had ever asked what I wanted to measure my own life against. Sitting there, I finally understood what I needed to tell them. It wasn't only no. The rest of me, the accountant, the aunt who bought school supplies, the woman who still wanted to help, needed to speak too. What I wanted to say was, not this way. Ask me and I may help. Force me and I will close the door. I stood, found a sturdy folder, and began preparing for my grandmother's birthday dinner. I needed 3 things. It took me about a week 2 phone calls I had been avoiding, and 1 checkbook. The invitation arrived in the mail because Grandma Evelyn believed group texts were suitable only for emergencies and hostage negotiations. It was a cream-colored card in her uneven handwriting, inviting everyone to dinner on the last Saturday of September. About an hour later, my mother sent me a direct text. It was the first message she had sent me since the moving truck incident. "Come prepared to be part of this family again." I read it several times. It was a carefully written sentence. It offered reconciliation while quietly stating the price: "Come prepared to surrender." A few months earlier, that message would have been enough to control me. The reliable daughter could be managed with very little: a cold message, a warm smile, or the suggestion that things might go back to normal. But I had spent the summer learning the difference between being loved and being rented. I pressed a navy dress, confirmed the dinner with my grandmother by mail, and reviewed the folder one last time the night before the party. Every page was in place. The check was paper-clipped at the front. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. My mother had organized a birthday dinner, but I knew she had also prepared a public confrontation. That was fine. I had learned that the person who stays calm can sometimes control the direction of a room. Grandma Evelyn's dining room had a table large enough for 18 people beneath an old lace cloth. That evening, it was packed. My parents, the Doyles, Aunt Denise and her husband, several older relatives, the women from St. Andrews, and cousins I normally saw only at funerals were all there. Place cards had been set out, even though my grandmother never used them. Every one had been written in my mother's handwriting. My seat was between Aunt Denise and one of the older relatives who could barely hear conversation. I ate, passed the biscuits, and complimented the roast. My folder stayed in my bag beneath the chair. I watched my mother guide the evening as if she were directing an event at the church. We sang. Grandma blew out the candles with Sophie on her lap. For a short time, the dinner was almost pleasant. Then coffee was served. My mother stood and tapped a spoon against her glass. She thanked everyone for coming and spoke about how important family was, especially during difficult seasons. Then she turned toward me.
"We're happy Melissa came tonight," she said warmly. "We're hoping she'll finally give us an answer. Megan and the children need a home, sweetheart. So which will it be, your sister or that house?" The room turned toward me. Lily stopped eating and looked from her mother to me. A spoon struck a plate somewhere at the table. My mother remained standing, presenting the choice as if there were only 2 possibilities: give up my home or be cast out. I placed my napkin beside my plate and stood. "Let's answer that properly," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I lowered it and used the same tone I used when reviewing a client's accounts: calm, precise, and impossible to misunderstand. "Before I respond, I want us to be clear about what we're discussing." Then I laid out the entire history. The arrangement made before Christmas about where my sister's family would live, even though I had never agreed to buy a larger house. The Parkview property my mother kept directing me toward, the spare key that disappeared from my kitchen during the housewarming, the moving truck that arrived after I changed the locks, and the debt. I said, "A little over 2 years ago, Mom and Dad borrowed $92,000 against Cedar Avenue to keep Daniel's business alive. The business failed. The payments are now draining their retirement income. That is what this has been about. That is why every solution had to pass through me." No one looked shocked. That was how I knew most of them already understood. Aunt Denise stared into her coffee. Daniel looked down at his hands. My mother lifted her chin. Then, for the first time in the 36 years I had studied her voice, she shouted, "You had no right to expose that," I answered quietly. "Megan and Daniel need a home, but what you've been asking me to become is the home." The words settled over the table. I reached beneath my chair and placed the folder on the lace cloth. "I didn't come here only to refuse. I came to show you what I'm willing to do when I'm asked instead of ordered." I opened the folder and removed the first item. It was a check. "Megan, Daniel, I found a 3-bedroom apartment on Willow Court, 10 minutes from Lily's school. I toured it earlier this week. The manager agreed to hold it through the 1st of the month." I placed the check in front of my sister.
This covers the first and last month. It's written to the property company, not to you or Mom. Your names will be on the lease. No one will be doing you a favor every time you walk through your own front door." Megan stared at the check. Her mouth tightened. Daniel put his palm on the table as if he needed to steady himself. The second item was a clipped packet of papers. I turned toward my father. "This is a restructuring proposal for the Cedar Avenue loan. The term is longer and the monthly payment is lower, low enough to fit your pension. I ran the numbers several ways. They work. You can keep the house. I'll prepare the application and go to the bank with you. I won't charge you." My father placed 2 fingers on the packet without picking it up. Then I removed the third item. It was a blank sheet of paper. I carried it to my mother and set it in front of her. She frowned. "What is that supposed to be?" "The page where someone finally asks me what I want." She looked down at it. "It has been empty for 23 years, I said. "I've been waiting for someone to use it." Her hands began to shake. The room was so quiet that the kitchen clock could be heard from the dining room. "One condition applies to all of this," I said. "Bellwood Avenue is not part of the discussion. It never will be." My mother stood. "If you leave this house, Melissa, don't expect to come back." I picked up my coat. Love that requires constant payment isn't love, it's rent. I've paid for 23 years and I'm finished. My grandmother spoke from the end of the table. "Let her leave, Elaine. You know better than anyone what staying can cost." I kissed Grandma Evelyn on the head and wished her a happy birthday. Then I walked out. I didn't know whether the check, the loan packet, or the blank page would still matter the next morning. I didn't know whether I had just exchanged my entire family for a house with pencil marks left by strangers. The door chime sounded behind me. No one followed. Both things were true. I cried during the drive home, but it wasn't because I regretted my decision. Somewhere along State Road 19, I finally saw the full pattern. The shoebox, the smile, and all the years of being needed had convinced me that usefulness was love. My mother had lived by the same belief since the day her nursing school letter vanished from my grandmother's kitchen table. We had both been paying the same emotional debt. She had simply never been shown the account. That night, I left the bank. I reached Bellwood Avenue around 10. The porch light was on because I had left it that way for myself. I sat in the driveway and looked at the small house I had been called selfish for loving. 2 bedrooms, 1 repaired step, a green bowl beside the toaster, still empty. When I turned the new key in the lock, I realized it was the first night of my life when no one else knew where I was. There was no family schedule, no committee, and no assignment waiting for me. It felt like grief. It also felt like ownership. For 3 days, my family said nothing. On the 4th morning, my phone displayed a name I didn't expect, Daniel. In 9 years, my brother-in-law had rarely spoken more than necessary to me. His pride had spent nearly 2 years sleeping on his in-laws' fold-out couch. His message said, "Megan turned in your check this morning. We got the apartment. The kids saw the rooms. Lily chose the one with the window seat. I'm sorry about what happened on your porch. Thank you." I read it at my desk until the words blurred. The person in the family who had been most humiliated by needing help was the first to accept help without demanding surrender in exchange. That was when I learned the difference between people who need assistance and people who need control over you. People who truly need help will accept it, even when it doesn't come with ownership of the person offering it. A week later, Megan texted me as if nothing unusual had happened. "Are we still doing school pickup on Tuesdays?" No apology, no explanation, just logistics. I agreed. A bridge doesn't have to be beautiful to carry people across. My father came by that Sunday and repaired the latch on my back gate, even though it wasn't broken. He drank 1 cup of coffee and sat near the door. "The bank accepted the application," he said. That was his entire announcement. The loan restructuring went through later that fall. The payment now fits their retirement income, and Cedar Avenue is no longer at risk. No one thanked me publicly. There was no family announcement. My mother's name remained absent from my phone for most of the season. Now it's December. Once a month, I make pancakes at Bellwood Avenue. Lily, Owen, and Sophie come over, and there are flowers everywhere and children's things scattered through the rooms. A new set of pencil marks has begun on my closet door frame beside Nora's and Caleb's. Lily stands against the frame while I record her height and the date in my own handwriting. My birthday was 2 weeks ago. Between a utility bill and an appliance advertisement, I found a cream-colored card with my mother's handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a printed birthday message. Under it, she had written only, "Love, Mom." I stood at the counter holding it for a while. The aunts still tell their version of the story at church. I no longer correct them. Some accounts are closed not because the numbers finally agree, but because you stop carrying the account. Last Sunday, Grandma Evelyn came over for pancakes. She inspected the house with her cane and declared the window seat sensible, which in her language meant excellent. Before she left, I placed a newly cut key in her hand. Then I walked to the toaster and dropped another one into the green ceramic bowl where anyone in my kitchen could see it. Given is not the same as taken, I told her. Grandma looked at the bowl, then at me, and nodded. 23 years, she said. Some locks take time to change. This is what I know now. Family is not made up of people who can take from you without asking. Family is made up of the people who knock, even when they already have a key. That's my story. One house, one missing key, and one check written directly to a landlord. If you're still paying for love, maybe this is your reminder that no is a complete sentence, even at your mother's table. Share your story in the comments and subscribe if you want to hear the next one.